If you're not concerned about mental health nowadays, maybe you should be. What's your best guess as to the why of what's happening in the world? And given the way things are trending, do we have reason to be optimistic about it? Part of my morning ritual is to, I wake up, I have my coffee, and then I skim through the news. And yesterday, while I was going through my Apple News feed, I read a headline that was so jarring I had to do a double take. The way the story was reported describes an incident at a VA hospital in Florida with an Army veteran who was there for what I'm guessing is, a routine visit or whatever. At some point, the Army veteran, a double amputee, in a wheelchair, both legs gone below the knee, gets upset, pulls out a gun, and starts shooting the place up. So one of the doctors somehow jumps into action, wrestles the gun from the vet, and in the process gets shot in the neck. And as I was reading the article, I started laughing to myself. Not, I wasn't laughing my balls off, but it was just kind of like a nervous chuckle. And I just kind of thought like, damn, what the fuck is wrong with me? Like, this clearly isn't funny. But the laughter didn't come out of any kind of comic relief or whatever, or my sick sense of humor this time. It came more out of disbelief. Like it almost felt like I was reading a sketch from Saturday Night Live or just looking at a scene from Family Guy. It was just unreal. And to give you context, I've seen and heard a lot of crazy shit in my life. Like, I remember once when I was younger, there was a guy that was high on PCP and he tripped out and was running through the streets naked and like flapping his dick against his legs and his stomach. It was weird. It was real weird. Maybe I'll tell that story at another time. But I don't know how common these things are, these sort of incidents that happen in VA hospitals. But having said that, I totally have empathy for the vet. And this guy is obviously dealing with some serious emotional issues, and props to the very courageous doctor who put himself in harm's way to preserve lives. Like, that is just huge. And by the way, if you're wondering, I believe the doctor is recovering okay. But I want to bring this back to the topic of mental health and what people refer to as, quote, crazy. And what we're going to do a little bit later is we're going to play a little game of detective. But first, I want to quickly just sum up some of the crises that happen here in the U.S. specifically. We have lots of erratic behavior, deadly violence, gender conflicts, college protests, mob behavior on social media, religious extremism, political extremism. We have an opioid epidemic. There's a loneliness epidemic. There's lots of shit going on in this country and in the world in general. So it begs the question, can we point to an actual cause? What is to blame, or what is the cause? But before we get to that, one of my favorite TV shows is HBO's The Wire, and in my opinion, it's one of the greatest pieces of American art ever. And for the uninitiated, it's basically a show that centers on the Baltimore Police Department conducting phone surveillance on heroin dealers, right? So on one particular episode, there was this great scene with two cops. One was an older, wiser detective, Detective Freeman, and the younger, naive detective, Presbeluski, I think his name was. And so to just sort of paraphrase what happens in the scene, the two detectives were monitoring phone surveillance of these drug dealers. And the younger detective dismissed what he thought was a useless piece of evidence and as it's just basically unimportant, non-essential. Freeman, the experienced detective, stopped him and said, no, this is important. And then kind of reiterated saying, look, all the pieces matter when we're doing these investigations. So in other words, what appeared to be insignificant was very much crucial to their case. So bringing us back to mental health, what do we say about the quote unquote crazy? These people we attach varying degrees of irrational and self-destructive or sometimes violent tendencies towards. And another question that comes up, like, is there a blueprint to help us understand better and to deal with these, I'm going to say again, the so-called crazy behavior? And let me just say that I still struggle with this and figuring it out. But I at least want to get as many people as talking about it and thinking about it so we can all kind of collectively make better sense of it. Here's where I think the misconnection is. I think when you're talking about a lot of this crazy behavior, I think we're looking at these people through a very narrow lens. I also believe that chemical imbalances or genetic or mental disorders might be low-hanging fruit, and in the process, we're missing a lot of key details that explains what's going on a grander scale. This could be a prime case of people not knowing what they may not know, and as a result, some of us oversimplify irrational and erratic patterns of behavior and chalk it up to just being, I'm going to say it again, quote unquote crazy. So reconnecting the dots, if there's a blueprint to crazy, at this point, it may be far too fluid and complex to map it out, especially if you're like me and you don't really belong to the science or the academic community. There's just like so much information and so much detail that we're not familiar with. But what we can do is we can kind of backtrack. So let's play a little detective, and we'll put on our imaginary fedoras, ugly ass overcoat, whip out that giant magnifying glass the way investigators did back in the olden days. And let's just kind of run through some major events in the last 2 decades, right? So, let's see, early 2000s, we had 9/11, that attack, 2 wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, social media emerges, reality TV builds momentum, we got the 2008 financial crisis, the growth of video games into American pop culture. We have the smartphone entering the market. I think like maybe in the mid to late 2000s. And then we, of course, had the infamous 2016 election with the presidential race. More currently, we have people caught on cell phone video being unkind assholes to one another. We have the opioid epidemic and a lot of stuff going on, but those are some of the, if you will, some of the lowlights. In my opinion, the common thread is that these are all major events that impact the brain's chemistry, whether people know it or not. Now, there may be some positives with some of these events, clearly, but I think there's definitely some science-backed research to support adverse effects. And actually, I don't think I know, because I've read some of the research, and how harmful some of these things are to the brain, especially social media, cell phone usage, and just a few other things. So, for example, if you're interested, check out Business Insider's coverage of how smartphones cause depression and addiction. Did you know that? So just looking forward, if your brain's chemistry is altered, then it stands to reason that your brain's function can change, which means that the way you interact with people and the world around you is impacted. Yes? Are you with me? So how can we have so many significant events in that time frame converging on us where there are not negative consequences with mental health? So what we're dealing with may be, dare I say, some mental reckoning that's been brewing for almost 2 decades. So it's really, is it really a surprise when all of this crazy shit jumps off? Like these deadly shootings in the workplace and at schools, people being unkind to each other more so often, this severe political division and extremism and everything else that makes its way to the news headlines. So I think all of these events combined, as well as other factors, threaten mental health on a few levels. So I think the first level is our existential stability. So meaning, there was a time where you thought, you'd get out of school, some of you get married, buy a home, raise kids, send them to school, and at some point retire with your shitty looking clothing on some beach. But then, you have events like the financial crisis and some of these school shootings that sort of shatter, this image of how your life would be, or the job market, or just whatever. So I think the second one is, it seems like there's been some sort of, I want to say, distorted perception of the world and life. And so it seems like there's been this ever-expanding and exaggerated definition, namely of the word friend. I mean, some people I know have 500 or even 1,000 friends in their social media network, yet they only really interact with or speak to a tiny fraction face-to-face, or not at all, leaving people feeling lonely. You got all these fucking friends, but you're still feeling lonely. How does your brain reconcile that? So then on the next level is the subconscious. Like, you have to wonder, what is happening in the background of your mind with all of these different events happening however many, at however many intervals? Like, how is your subconscious reacting to all this social collision and these conversion events affecting our world one after another? How does that happen? So I think what I want to get to now is probably the best advice I can give to you, and what I believe can help you in protecting your mental health and understanding others who may have these kind of a challenge. And I put it in two parts. I think the first part I'm going to call mental fitness, and the other, which I don't really have a clever name for at all, I just call it your life diet. And I'll get to that in a second. So your mental fitness, I look at the brain like a muscle. And I think if you challenge it to grow and stay agile regularly, benefits will follow. It becomes resilient and durable to stressful situations over time. Now, an unused muscle is a weak muscle. Or even if you're in a situation where your brain was once strong and it decrementally gets weaker, well, then that's called atrophy, just like a regular muscle in your arms or your legs or your back or whatever. So what's key is to keep your mind as reasonably active and sharp as possible, whether it's, learning a language, starting a new hobby, volunteering, doing challenging activities like gardening, reading, etc. Make your brain do constructive activities regularly. I think that's one thing you can absolutely do, and be creative about it. I think the second one we call, or what I'm calling the life diet, it breaks out into a few parts. The first thing you got to do is you got to look at the food sources that you put in your body. You got to fuel your body with nutrient-dense food based on whatever your budget allows. Your brain has the best chance to function optimally when it gets the high level of balanced sources. Now, another thing that it pays to do is to learn the roles that different food groups and minerals have in fueling the body, where you can make better choices on setting up your meals throughout the day. Next, your eyes and ears. What are your eyes and ears absorbing? What's happening in your environment? The TV you watch, the people you interact with, your smartphones, your computers. What are you seeing and hearing every single day? Every image and message that enters through your eyes and ears will then be transmitted to your brain. So if you are repeatedly witnessing hundreds of images of despair and destruction and high levels of dysfunction, naturally this will impact you, and it's probably going to be something negative. So what you have to do is you have to do your best to integrate positive images in to eventually overpower and crowd the bad images out. Right? Next one, your inner voice. What types of things are you telling yourself? What is the general narrative? Are they inspiring and encouraging things, or is it a bunch of doom and gloom that just eventually weighs you down? It matters tremendously. Like, look, there is plenty to be happy and positive about, whether you may want to believe it or not. If you're not seeing it, you got to adjust the angle of your view, and look at life in a more favorable way. Remember this quote from the Bible? So a man thinketh he is. It may sound corny to you, may sound goofy, makes sense to me. Try it out. Last one, I'm never not going to preach exercise and the benefits of it. So most of us, look, we're not world-class athletes or fanatics about like CrossFit, but that doesn't mean you're excluded from natural benefits of physical activity. So you may say, oh, I don't have a gym membership, or it's raining outside. Look, let's not jerk each other off here. Barring any illness or physical ailments, there's plenty of things you can do, like walk, do jumping jacks, do push-ups, jump rope, run in place. I don't know, you can get creative. There are like hours and hours and hours of video on YouTube to show you how to do exercise. And there's people putting out that kind of content that will help you if you're a beginner or intermediate or even advanced, to help you get into better shape, or at least maintain the physical condition that you have now. The reason people feel good after a workout is because that thing between your ears is a drug lab. It's a good drug lab if you do good things with it. And if you're not doing good things with it, well, then you get the opposite, right? Exercise triggers good hormones to release in your body, and things like hours of TV do the opposite. Okay, so that's all I got for you today. If you got questions, comments, ideas for show content, the email address is info@themisconnected.com. Once again, we're on all the platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, Google, YouTube, Twitter. Handle is Misconnected P. That's Misconnected letter P. We are on Instagram. Search under the Misconnected Podcast. We're on Patreon. That is it. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.